Machine here, and you're watching Thorin's YouTube channel. 20-minute video for 2 minutes worth of content. Gold.
As the French scene looks to reclaim some of its past glory with the new G2 lineup featuring legendary in-game leader Existence from Source and early CSGO, paired with the two superstar talents that France has produced in CSGO, Shox, the amazing all-around rifler, godlike mid-round player, amazing clutch master, and Kenny S, the all-time greatest AWPer for my money, amazing every year he wants to be, even when he fucks around and doesn't really try that hard, he's sick. But the obvious question we have to ask ourselves is, where's the second best French team? This is a scene that at certain points in history early on was able to sometimes in the early majors produce 3 top teams that could go to majors, could compete there. They were up there with Sweden, with Denmark as the elite nations. They're one of the most decorated scenes of all time. And so with the talent you actually see out there now, they need a legitimate second best team. G2, we don't yet know if this is the final lineup that'll finish the year, where it'll get to. It's got some promise there. I personally think they're one piece away from being an elite team. But okay, they're working Shox back in from his injury. Existence has come back. Smiths hasn't even played for a year or so. Kenny S has to get motivated again, as he now hopefully is. And Body's adapting to actually having to be more of a fragger than he was in the last lineup and used more, hopefully. So you look out there beyond G2, and when I say beyond G2, I'm also including NBK and Apex, because presumably, unless there's a move within that lineup, they will end up outside of G2 eventually when their contracts end or when buyouts occur. Well, you look outside the team, and it's not like, oh, well, the talent just died off from that scene, and they're just not that good. I mean, for example, in Sweden, they're having a real hard time now with a lot of talent and a lot of roles being filled. But you look in the French/Belgian scene, the talent is there. Clearly, I mean, still some of them playing at a good level where they could be a part of a top team. The experience is there. Players who've been deep in majors, who've done it all. The resume is there. Players who've been champions, major champions, had top placings, been in the playoffs of majors regularly. Admittedly, just as with NBK and Apex, yes, buyouts are an issue. Politics is an even bigger issue, as I always point out when it comes to the French teams. And a subtopic of that, a tangent, is I actually think it's not just politics anymore. Before it was like who likes who. Now it's about attitude and who can play a role, as well as who's going to be the in-game leader, because you have so few true entry players in the French scene now. It feels like everyone wants to be a mid-round player and get an ideal duel. All the in-game leaders that are left are really flawed, which is why Shox actually made the move to remove himself from being an in-game leader and bring Existence back. They've all bombed majors at this point in time, so it's not like they can look at Existence and say, you've bombed majors. They all have now, mate. And then there seem to be motivation issues that are widespread. And so whenever you pick a player up, you're gambling that you can get a gauge, a read on how actually motivated he is to win now, not just to play and get a nice salary. So if we look at the players out there, my first category is going to be the players that, for me, these would be certain picks for this team. So the obvious players are the two G2 players, NBK and Apex. NBK is a sick fill player. He has played many roles in his career. He can be a lurker. He can be a secondary caller. I'm not sure about in-game leader personally. He can be a supportive player. He can be a second entry for you. He can be an entry for you. He can do a lot of stuff. He can even be a secondary AWP if he wants to. He is a veteran. He is a professional. He brings experience, poise, drive to win. He doesn't fuck around and lose motivation. He is a clear pick for someone who can be a captain in terms of a leader by example and keeping people on track. And his secondary caller experience means he can also help out with the primary in-game leader, who can just be a tactician, because NBK to some degree can be the leader in the sense of leading men, making men follow him. Now, Apex, one of the best entry players we have ever had in CSGO. And this is a guy now who has been through the hard times when he's a pure entry in Titan, in the LDLC, in the Envious lineup that he was in, where HawpT was just making him run through a brick wall. But I have to say, when I was doing my research for the video about the LDLC lineup from 2014 that he was a part of with HawpT, from watching those games, I actually think Apex is at his best when he's oftentimes swapping out and being a second entry. Because in that team, it was Uzi rushing in first, playing as a bait oftentimes, getting the info that I think allowed Apex to be literally a godlike player, like one of the best players in the world from any role, and clearly the best entry fragger. Also, the style of that team was like a slow build-up into fast timing attacks where you all burst onto the site. That also suited his style as well. He wasn't going in first. He was going in ahead of people, but with other people as well. And that chaos, that's where his streaky aim and his fast movement, that could really help him thrive. So I still think he can be a great entry player if he has the right mentality, but I actually think that's something to consider. And I wonder if they can find a player who can play with him in a duo in that sense. Now, beyond those two players, who I think are the clear-cut, obvious options, they're the two world-class players in their roles that you'd want for those aspects. And by the way, I definitely think you can switch up MBK's role. I would say that these are my options that I'm on the fence about. I can go a lot of different ways on these. I think all of them are flawed. All of them have their positives. So I'll start with RPK. Because I think RPK, since he came back to CSGO, was actually a pretty good player before he retired. People just don't know because he only played like 4 lands or something and lost them all to NIP. But he was actually pretty solid early on in CSGO, a decent skill set. Then he obviously retired for a couple of years. When he came back in Titan, I've said the story many times, he was pretty bad. He didn't really have a read for the game. He was just an average fragger, and Apex, not Apex, well, Apex by the end, but Apex in existence had to some degree sort of micro him a bit and put him in position. So that took too much mental power from the rest of the team. But year on year since he came back, he has improved. And even though this year was something of a joke for him, last year he had some periods of time where he was looking really good actually, and in a fairly whack team, quite frankly. So what I like about this guy is I don't even need him to be a star for me. I think he's just a solid player. He does his job. He has similar aim to that kind of mentality of like a solid player, stable aim, not some crazy highlight player, but he's going to do his job. I see him in terms of where he should fit into a top team as the Cajun B of the French scene. You want him as sort of your third best player, whereas Cajun B is going to give you the versatility and the AWPing. This guy's going to give you some clutching. He's going to give you just like consistent fragging. He's going to hit his shots. It's not going to go nuts, but he's going to do what he needs to, and that's going to prop up your star players. So one of my questions, though, comes to his mentality. Does he have a stable mentality? Like, is he a person, because he hasn't had a chance to win much in CSGO, is he a person who can hold it together in the big matches? He hasn't been in a whole lot since he came back, and a lot of them were his teams losing. Titan, G2, Envious. He's a guy with a lot of experience, which is a massive plus, and in both games now, because he's got legit CSGO experience, Source and CSGO. But my big question overall for him is motivation. Last year, with his injury, coming into this year, the real question was, is his heart still in it? Does he want to go like Existence and refuse to retire until he wins a major and go all out and give up everything? If not, if he just wants to play and be a solid veteran and earn a nice salary, much higher than he ever made in Source, and be a solid player that people sort of enjoy but doesn't have the big personality to be a huge name, he can do that. And there's teams out there he can do it in, maybe even an international team, quite frankly, as he's doing now in Temple Storm. But I think he could actually be in a better team if he wanted to be. But will he be able to do it in this team? Is he willing to go for broke like I hope NBK and Apex are? And I actually imagine NBK probably is. Because if not, maybe I don't take him. He's got the frag in, but I want people with the right mentality. So then we come to a player called Kiyashima. Now, Kiyashima has the experience. He's been in major winning teams. He's got a really solid all-around game. He showed you what he could do from kind of a supportive end of the equation when he was over in FaZe and where he was winning clutches all over the place. He's even in the latest team, the left-out team, in the last Envious lineup at the CSGO Asia Championship, showed flashes of leadership, actually, and something of a half-decent force spy / loose style of leadership. Where the fuck's that been for the last few years? Because obviously Shocks and Happy somewhat fluffed that style for the last 2 years by trying to force it to work when it wouldn't work, funnily enough. But this is a guy where it is only and all about attitude for me with him. Because I'm going to go ahead and say this now. I won't say the circumstances. I've alluded to this in the past. But I will say it as is the information I have. This is a guy who was kicked entirely justifiably from 2 world-class major contender teams. Envious in 2016, and then obviously you have the FaZe team after they bombed PGL Krakow. And he was kicked justifiably solely for his attitude and his motivation. Those were the issues holding him back, and that the team saw as a reason as to why they didn't want to have this guy anymore, and they replaced him. Now, I think he's got the skill set to do it. I still think he's a young enough player. He could do it. I think this could be a good fit for this team, but I also want to know, where would he fit politically with MBK and Apex? guys that cut him, obviously. Does he have the motivation? He seems like he does. He's shown flashes recently, so it's positive, but I don't know if they would be willing to bank on that if they know, because a lot of these players have played together in the past and don't necessarily want to play together again. Now, after that, we move on to HawpT. Now, people might already be thinking this is a joke. Like, why are you picking HawpT? Like, come on, man. You don't think HawpT's good. Like, he's not going to make it. I have always defended HawpT's skills in the game. And actually, up until last year, I even would have said with the right team, I still think he could have been a good in-game leader and done potentially great things, at least good to very good things. That's no longer the case in terms of in-game leaders. So for me, the reason I'm picking him as an option for this team is because he is still a skilled player. Even in 2017, when his team was fucking whack and it was just never going to go anywhere. But bringing him into this team depends solely on his attitude and the role he will play. I've given up on him as an in-game leader. It seems too stubborn to me. To be fair, he's very antagonistic to me, so I can't really know what he's like to other people. But I've heard stories and just not a fan of it personally. I think there's a reason everyone's given up on him at this point in time. Everyone gave up on existence just solely because the guy bombed majors. It's nothing to do with anything else. People gave up on HawpT because of his attitude and motivation, even when he'd won them majors. That's all you need to know. So as long as he's not going to be the in-game leader, if he's willing to be a secondary caller or play some role in the tactics, but be something of a lurker, his strength, use his pretty decent skill set, hopefully improve his attitude and be a bit less sort of despairing, just ambivalent. Like these aren't really great qualities to have if you're going to be in a team, especially not as a leader, by the way. If he's willing to be the secondary caller, then there's potential for him to be in this team. He's certainly good enough. I do worry that if his attitude doesn't change, though, then like in the Envious team of 2016, he might sabotage the team when he's not the in-game leader, which is what he did when MBK took over. And I thought it was, quite frankly, a disgrace. One of the worst things he's done in his career, and I hope that he's learned his lesson from that and won't ever do it again. The last player... oh, no, actually, there's a couple more players. But the last player in this category... Come on, who haven't I mentioned so far? Superstar name. It's Scream, obviously. First and foremost, Scream has amazing skills. I know to this day people think, nah, he's washed up, he's a bum. You just saw it at the CS:GO Asia Championships. When he has the right style, when he's feeling it personally, the guy's lights out. Yes, he certainly hasn't done that very often in Envious, although actually people don't realise, because the first period of Envious was so bad. I mean, the middle and latter was shit as well, but people mainly saw in the first period was when he was struggling, because he came in the team, he thought, right, HawpT, RPK, you've got fucking... Scream here, this should be a sick team. And because it wasn't, people looked at Scream and his numbers weren't up there and he wasn't fragging that sick and he looked like he was a bit lost in the team. Later on in the team, for some bizarre reason, he willingly took on some sort of support role, which didn't make sense. But when Kiyoshima turned him loose, he was banging fucking heads off, even against the Navis of the world. So I still think his skills are there. It's just that he's got two aspects to him. One, he needs to be babysat, but in terms of his mood and his mentality, he needs someone who can make him believe that he's going to be this sick fragger that he's needed to be, that he's got this upbeat attitude because he can get very emotional, but not in game does he need to be babysat, because I think he is a strong fragger who needs to be turned loose, to have space created for him that he moves into, and then he decides what to do from that, and he shows us that amazing skill that we all know the guy has, because you need him, and you need some strong fraggers in this team. The guy's the biggest gun in the scene in that sense, out of the players that are left who aren't in G2, because there's no Kenny S and Shocks available. Now, those are the players where I've got 2 that are certain, I've got 4 that I can choose between, and then I'm going to put 2 in just to consider them and explain why I probably wouldn't pick them personally. And these are the players I would describe as the ones I don't think I would gamble on. So I'm going to start with the one that'll probably shock a lot of people on Reddit, which is Zwiu. The player who's the very young player, who's technically contracted to Against All Authority, legendary French org, by the way, from the early days of CS, and who everyone's waiting for him to finish school, come and sign for a big deal with a G2 or some squad and be like the star player of the French scene, as a young Shocks was, as a young Kenny S was. They expect that from him. The problem is, despite the fact that on the lower levels and semi-pro level I've seen him play, he certainly seems to have sick talent. Sick talent ain't enough to get you through the door for me, especially not if I want to be a team that's going to win majors. Like, that's good to get onto a team like an NRG, if you're on LDLC. These are great teams to start off on, keep showing you sick, move your way up. He hasn't done that yet. So the big problem is he has no legitimate competitive experience when we're talking about the context of this team, which is going to be a top 10, hopefully top 5 team in the world and contend for majors. So no, I don't think that I would actually pick him in that respect, because we have no clue how he will do. I mean, think of how many year one pros who were at the top level in terms of their team and context who were actually godlike right off the bat. There's very, very few, and they tended to, by the way, have massive flaws like the Simples and Nikos and had to get over those. And oftentimes they're that good because they're on like mediocre teams where they get to do anything they want to do and they just shine and they have to learn the opposite way. It's not that often you get that player and put him on a top team and he immediately shines like that. So personally, I wouldn't gamble on him right now. What I would do is I would let him go to another team and I would let him showcase that he's good enough, as people out there in the scene did. And then once you've seen he's good enough, either G2 or this squad can then make the move in a year, in 2 years, when he's ready to then pick up a really skilled player who's got the experience, shown he can do it, shown he can play with teammates, got a good attitude. You get to know him as a person, you competed against him, then you pick him up, then he's the clear player. Because if you're going to take him into your team, I don't see the point in taking him in the way that G2 brought in Body in 2016, where he's just like, right, you just play whatever roles left, enjoy getting no fucking focal point from this team. That's a terrible way to manage a team. If I bring this guy in, if he's got this sick talent that everyone's seen, I want him to be one of my star players. But I'm not bringing in a player with no experience that young to be my star player. The Stewie 2K type moves of the world are incredibly, incredibly rare that they actually work out. For anyone who might think of, well, what about someone like KNG in 2017? That guy was playing in the Brazilian scene for years before. He even played with fucking Fallen in like 2013 in a team. So that guy was around and was a known quantity. And there's reasons he wasn't a top teammate. He wasn't some first year pro. Then you got to look at someone like HawpT. HawpT wasn't meant to be the star player at first. He came into a team with a Dren just banging everyone out. He had Zeus, very decorated in-game leader. He had solid role players. He had a team that didn't even rely on mad firepower. And then he eventually, month by month, developed into a really strong player. But even then, he wasn't the kind of player you're expecting Zwiu to be. So I'm personally not going to go ahead and say I'll take him. The last player I also wouldn't gamble on is Major from Space Soldiers, because obviously he played in the French scene in CS 1.6. Now, if you bring him in, presumably you're bringing him in as an in-game leader, the role that he plays in Space Soldiers. That's my problem, because I'm sure that it would even work. Like, first of all, the last thing the French scene wants is to just play some silly Force Spy ultra loose style, because they haven't been able to make it work the last few years. They probably want a hybrid style. Some Force Spy, some aggressive loose style for the Screams of the world, the Happies of the world, but then you also want some tactics for the RPKs, the Kiyoshimas, the MBKs to make work and to make a quality system and to have consistency in your game, not just live and die by fragging. And you're probably not going to have fraggers of the level of FaZe anyway in this team. So personally, when I've looked at Space Soldiers, it baffles me that people keep talking about Major and thinking that he's a player that should be in the French scene, because I actually think they are a team that's pretty shit and gimmicky when it comes to strats, and they live off fragging and a somewhat loose style and turning the boys loose. So I don't know why people hail him. I think it's just due to his failures being on a much lower level and not being so indelibly burned into your memory as Existence, Happy, NBK over the last couple of years. I mean, the fact that they failed on a higher level doesn't mean that like you should try Major because he hasn't failed yet. Like that's not good rationale. It should be based on him being good and good at his role that he gets recruited, not that he hasn't failed when he wasn't even given the chance on the level that they were at. Now then, which of the players will I pick of my 5 from let me think. I've got like 8, I think I picked out there. So we'll start out. I said I've got MBK and Apex. So I'm going to go ahead and personally, I think what I would do there is I'm going to go ahead and say that I want Scream. I want a mad fragger. I think I'll go ahead and take him. I'll take RPK. I'll say it'll be stable. Now I really love my team. Problem is, in-game leader is an issue, and that's where I've got my questions, because I either am going to go now with Happy or Kiyoshima, but which one do I want? If Happy has his attitude corrected, he could be in the team. He could help with MBK, maybe the two of them combined, MBK doing a set strat style, Happy doing the loose style. By the way, many 1.6 teams had teams that were like that, where you had the tactical leader, and then you had the guy who gave him the secondary calls. Do you want to know a CSGO team that was like that? It was a little team called Heroic. And what happened was they came out of nowhere. Their best player was a player called Valde, who hadn't even been a top pro. And one of the reasons they were able to get all these upsets, beat out like the Dignitases of the world, the Astralis of the world, and get to be like a legit top 10 team briefly in 2016, apologies, was because they had Snappy decent enough in-game leader who'd worked himself in that role, and their secondary in-game leader was a guy called Glaive, who, as you saw on that team, can frag, as you see now in Astralis, and for secondary calls, could throw in that nice call, that adaptation, to take snappies leading over the top. And I don't think they were ever as good overall after Glaive left, not just because they lost his fragging, because they didn't have that secondary man. That's why I think NBK and HawpT could play for each other if they can fix their duo. But in a world where I say, you know what, HawpT can't do it, he's just not going to be that type of player, then I'll tell you what, I'll immediately go ahead and say, you know what, Kiyoshima, you're not really traditionally an in-game leader, but if you've got the motivation to do it, you can certainly be a solid fragger for in-game leader. You've got an all-around game. You've played supportive aspects. Let's bring you in. And hey, you didn't like the way roles were done in the last Envious. You decide the roles, mate. MBK is going to be your secondary caller. You do it a little bit loose to some degree. He brings in some of the strats, maybe brings in like a call for what we should do, reading the game tactically. I think that's a pretty solid lineup. First of all, bunch of veterans, bunch of skilled players. I actually think the skill level probably underrated in this team. And I also think the experience tells you that this is a team that, if they can get the style together and get over their egos and politics, could be a strong lineup. This video was kindly supported by Dean Tanglis, Gardner Wilson, Andreas Snazore Westerlund, Alex Adams, Daniel Yordanov, TTMXMP, VeXii, HawpT, Robert Baxter and Travis Greb, with a special thanks going out to Jerky's Minion. Want teasers for my upcoming content? To ask a question for my monthly AMA? How about taking part in a discussion with me about esports? Or perhaps you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? Become a part of the Scrilluminati today at the Patreon link in the description box below.